So as the famous saying goes, this Shabbos is a very, very special Shabbos. And there are many things that make this Shabbos special. Shabbos Nachamu, God's comfort. Nachamu, Nachamu Ami, double comfort after coming from Tisha B'Av. So coming from the lowest point, we reach to the highest point, because ultimately the descent is in order to make a greater ascent. For that alone, the Shabbos is very special. But I want to focus in on one thing in this week's Parsha that is very special to the Jewish people throughout the ages. It is in this week's Parsha. It is a daily prayer that we say twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. It is words that Jews have committed their lives to, in the sense that they've, ready to give up their lives as a result of this. And there's so much to engage in over here, but we'll try at least to give a little glimpse so that this particular prayer, which probably the most famous one of all, the Shema Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and the whole first paragraph in this week's Parsha. Today's actually Achitas and the sixth Aliyah, and so much here. Let us understand it. So it will, first of all, it'll help us in this week's Torah portion to appreciate it. Secondly, moreover, not just this portion, but daily that we say it twice a day, it will enhance our appreciation and understanding. And of course, being a vital part of our prayers, it's crucial that we have an appreciation. So let's get right to it. The word Shema Yisrael, meaning Hear, O Israel, or Hear Israel. I don't know where the O came in. I don't think we have any Irish blood in us. For some reason in the translation, the word O is there. Hashem is Elokeinu, our God. Hashem is one. So Shema means to hear, to listen. Who should listen? Israel, the Jewish people. Israel, the name of the Jewish people. What should we hear? So first I'm going to explain Rashi. His simple explanation of the text is Hashem Elokeinu. Hashem is our God, meaning the God of the Jewish people. Because right now, other nations, others reject Hashem Elokeinu, the Jewish God. They might believe in other gods, have another notion of God, but that it's our God, no. Right now, he is only our God. But Hashem Echad, in the future, meaning in times of Mashiach, all of the nations of the world will call out on one God, Hashem Echad, one Hashem. That's a simple meaning of the text, which is interesting because, pray tell, most people are probably not familiar with that, probably familiar with a little, maybe more complicated understanding of the text. But this is the simple meaning of the text, that right now he's our God, and in the future will be God of all of humanity. Okay, so that's what Rashi explains in Chumash. Let's take it a step further and understand this phrase, this prayer, this verse in the Torah. Let's understand it based on Hasidic teachings. So Shema Yisrael, first of all, Shema means to listen, meaning to understand. To understand. When you hear something, you hear in order that you can understand that which you're hearing. What should we understand? That Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, God's name, I'm sure we're all familiar with it. right? For those not familiar, tetragrammaton, which has in it, in Hebrew, the words past, present, and future, all in one name, meaning it's showing God's transcendence. God that is beyond this world. Elokeinu is also God within this world. God is transcendent and immanent in this world. In other words, he's to be found everywhere, and yet he transcends everything at the same time. Both are a reality of God. And that we need to know that the transcendence of God that we may experience, for example, as a miraculous thing that comes from God, and God the way he is in nature, as, water flows and the sunrise, sunset, all of that really is Hashem Echad. There's no distinction. There's no real difference between a miracle, God's transcendence, and God's immanence, in the sense that it is different levels, perhaps different appreciations, but it is all the oneness of God. What does it mean, the oneness of God? So here, the simple meaning Hashem Echad is that God is one and only. And we don't believe in another deity. We don't believe in Zeus. We don't believe in other religions, their deity. We only believe in Hashem Echad. Chassidus explains that meaning, which is the words that many Jews were last words on their lips as they gave up their lives because of Hashem Echad, that Hashem is the only one that we will serve, and we won't serve idolatry or any other faith. And Jews have given up their lives as a result of that, whether it's through the Crusades, Spanish Inquisition, you name it. We've we've experienced it. But Chassidus goes a step further and says that if it means only to express that there's only one God and not another deity that we believe in, then it should say Hashem Yachid. Hashem is the one and only singular God. But Hashem Echad suggests that God is one. He's one, but that doesn't mean there is not like two. There's not number two. There's not number three. There's others. It's suggesting that there's other things. So what does it mean Hashem Echad instead of Hashem Yachid? So what it's suggesting is that we live in a world of plurality. We live in a world of diversity. And you might feel, well, there's a God that is transcendent, and there's a God that's within nature, that's immanent. And we might feel that there are two opposing forces, within creation. No, Hashem Echad. There's a oneness of God. Whether it's transcendence, whether it's nature, it is all the oneness of God. There is no distinction. Hashem Echad. Meaning to say that in our lives, we need to find the oneness of God. Not just to believe that God is one and singular. Absolutely. That's as Rashi explains, that right now he's our God, the one and singular God. But in the time to come, in the future, he will be Hashem Echad. He will be Hashem that's one for all of the nations, meaning he will be accepted by all the nations of the world. Deeper explanation is not merely that God will be accepted, right, as the only deity, but the understanding and our relationship to God will also be accepted, meaning that the transcendence of God, the miraculous ways of God, shall we say, and the nature that we find around us, Hashem Echad, it's a oneness of God. It is all him in his oneness, meaning that there is no other reality but him. He is the only true reality. And that is what we need to find in our lives, on how there is that oneness of God in everything. Now, how do we get there? How do we, okay, that's something that we understand. That now the transcendence, the immanence of God. It's all a oneness of God. There isn't a distinction higher or lower. It's all of Him. How do we get there? Well, so there's another explanation in the Shema. Hear Israel, hear Jew. Know that the transcendence of God is Elokeinu. Elokeinu here in this explanation means Kechenu v'chayesenu. He is our power, He is our energy, He is our force. In other words, that transcendence of God is something that is a part of me and my neshama, and my soul. I have a part of Him in me, and hence I have a transcendence that I am capable of achieving. In other words, if I were left to my own makings, my own doings, just like on Tisha B'Av, I wouldn't be able to fast. I need Hashem's help. So likewise, we would be always seeing duality in our lives, higher, lower, bigger, smaller. We wouldn't be able to have an equanimity when it comes to things that happen in our lives, because there'll be big things, and then there'll be the very low and difficult things. But if we understand that Hashem has given us a transcendent power in our soul that's a part of Him, and Hashem Elokeinu, and then Hashem Echad, then we can come to an equanimity in our lives where the big things don't push us over, and the small things we don't trample on. We're able to raise them to something greater and bigger, and appreciate that. And a small thing can be huge, and in the big thing, we don't get lost in its bigness. We touch its core, and that's a capability that Hashem gives us in our neshama. That so, for example, when something very, tragic what happens, and we get lost in ourselves, which happens to us, we can climb out of that because we have a power in us that we can transcend because of the neshama that we have. Not to say it's easy, it's difficult, but we have that power within us. And that's what Shema Yisrael means. Shema Yisrael means listen, hear, understand this principle. And if we understand this principle, then hopefully we'll be able to live by that principle. But that's only the beginning. Where is that supposed to lead us, that Shema? Ve'ahavta es Hashem Elokecha, and you should love the Lord your God. It's interesting, here it's about an understanding, it's about an awareness of God, it's awareness of the peace of God within me. But that's only an awareness, not supposed to bring me then ve'ahavta. It says ve'ahavta. What does ve'ahavta mean? And you shall love. What do you mean, and you shall love? Why and? Why not? It's a new idea. And love God. Be aware of God, love God. Two separate things, but it's not. Why? It's because, first of all, the question is, how could God command us to love Him? Love is a feeling. Either you have it or you don't. So the answer is Shema Yisrael. God's not commanding us to love Him. He's commanding us to do everything that should bring us to love Him. When we understand that we have a piece of Him in us, that is transcendent power of Him, that gives us the capacity to rise above the human condition, and that God is immanent and transcendent in every experience that I have in my life. I can connect to His immanence and transcendence at the same time. When we think about that, that's very powerful. That means at any given moment, God is with me and giving me a power that's beyond me, beyond my natural capacity. He's giving that to me. So when we think that, what's that going to bring us to? You have to love him. Wow, you've given me this. That's very powerful. And that's going to bring v'ahavta, and there I'm going to love him as a result, because now I'm aware, I'm thinking, I'm meditating this powerful idea, and therefore it's going to bring to v'ahavta, just as the mind feeds the heart, so it will feed the heart, and it'll bring a love towards God. To what degree? V'ahavta Shema l'kecha b'chol levavcha. You're going to love him with both your hearts, as Rashi explains, with both your godly soul, which naturally loves God, but also with your animal soul, because your animal vital soul will appreciate and understand that, wow, I don't have to live a life that is meaningless or that it doesn't have the presence of purpose in every moment. If God is available and with me and giving a transcendent power every moment of my existence, so then even the animal soul can appreciate and understand, wow, this is a life worth living. The godly soul doesn't need to appreciate, doesn't need to understand this, because the godly soul naturally loves God and only wants to be connected with God. But the animal soul needs a reason. It needs something powerful. Wow. I mean, that this moment is a moment that I can literally rise above, that God is giving me that capability, that quality, that power in me. I just have to believe in myself that I have it, which is a challenge. This week, I must say that, just at certain moments, I felt, like to organize my day and to make sure that it's productive. And sometimes you just feel over the weight of things and don't feel transcendent, don't feel that I can rise above the moment. And it takes some doing and takes some thinking about it and some meditating upon it. And I'm thinking to myself, no, I'm beyond this. I can rise above it. Don't let yourself feel, that the human condition can control me. I can rise above it. And I think I sing to myself on Niggin, and I think of the Rebbe, and the empowerment that God gives me, and that I'm a chassid of the Rebbe and I represent him. And all of a sudden, it just, for me, it gave me that sense of being uplifted above and beyond that condition that was, feeling a little swallowed, shall we say, which we all experience. But here we have the capability, we can, have something to think about that allows us then in those moments to rise above. So v'ahavta, then it's going to bring us to a love of Hashem, not just a love of Hashem, but that we're ready to give up our lives even for him. And not only that, but we're ready to give all of our mo'idecha, all of our things in our lives. For some people, things are more important than life itself. That we're ready to give our things in our lives towards Hashem. But it doesn't end there. It goes a step further. That step further is that we now, having an awareness of God and a feeling towards God, one might think, well, okay, that's it. Isn't that what it's about? Awareness, self-awareness. Awareness of God is even greater than self-awareness, by giving us the awareness of true self of us, that we have a part of God in us. And then that brings us to a love of God. Well, what could be more than that? Well, then the verse continues. And these things, meaning Torah and mitzvahs, that I command you today. In other words, now it needs to come from a love, ready to give up your life, ready to give everything towards God. No, all I want is that you do a mitzvah. Put tefillin on, put mezuzahs up, as it continues in the verse, meaning I want you to connect to me. It's interesting. Till this point, we spoke about Hashem and Elokeinu, right? Transcendence of God, immanence of God. Now in this verse, we are saying something new. Asher Anoichi, I of God, not the name of God, but the I, the essence of God. I command you to do the mitzvah. The bottom line of everything is not the awareness that brings to a feeling in the heart, the love, and ready to give up your life and ready to give everything that you got towards God, but to connect to Anoichi, to the essence, the I of God, through the mitzvah, God's desire for the mitzvah. That's what the paragraph then continues with, practical mitzvahs of tefillin and mezuzah. Right? And actually before that, teach it to your students. You've learned something, v'shinantam levanecha, right? You should teach it. You should constantly be engaged in those teachings of Torah, whether you're sitting, whether you're in your home, whether you're in the pathway, whether you're lying down or getting up, whatever. Torah should be your reality of discussion. That's what should be on your lips. That's what should be what you come encounter with someone. A word of Torah, a teachings, a story of Torah, or something, an empowerment from the Torah, whatever. Might be small, but that's what is on our minds, on our lips, and so on. These things. And then you're connected with Anoichi through the study of Torah. And that study of Torah then comes to the practical deed of mitzvahs. We have a very powerful teaching here. Let us just give a basic review of what we just learned. Shema, we need to hear, we need to understand, we need to have a perspective of mind, a focus of the mind that is capable of giving us an awareness of God, the presence of God is transcendent, immanent, and then that power on our soul that is a part of God, and He is our power. We have a transcendent power within us, and that is all to bring us then to be a hafta, that it should bring to a feeling towards God, that we shouldn't be apathetic in our relationship to God. There should be some kind of feeling. Not going to be a palpable feeling of love. That's already a very high-minded. But, where will that feeling come to? It will come to that we're going to engage in His Torah, that we're going to have these words, and that I'm going to be connected to Anoichi. And because thinking about God and the oneness of God is not necessarily studying Torah. It's about thinking about God and your relationship to God, God's presence in the world, divine providence. It's not a mitzvah. It's not specifically a mitzvah. It's an important thing that leads to that feeling in the heart, right? But then comes to Anoichi, to connect to Anoichi in the study of His Torah, v'dibar tabam, and then teach that. And it's not enough that you learn yourself. You got to give it over to others. Interesting. V'shinantam levanecha, translated would be to teach your children, but it's not. The Talmud tells us your children are your students. Are your students. Meaning any Jew that you teach and you give something to them, in a sense, you are like a teacher and they are like your student. You are like a parent because you're giving life. You're giving greater life than a parent gives. The parent only gives you physical life unless they taught you Torah. If they didn't teach you Torah, then they brought you and gave you physical life. For that, we honor them. Absolutely. However, we honor our teacher even more than our parents if they didn't give us Torah. They didn't give us Torah, then we honor our teacher even more than our parents because our teacher gives us spiritual life, ultimate life. And therefore the verse says over here, teach it to your children. Children, Elo Talmidim, the Talmud tells us, the sages teach us, these are our students, because that is a real parent is giving spiritual life. And of course, a parent can give both. And from that, you attach yourself to Anechi, to the eye of God, not to the transcendence and the immanence of God, but to the essence of God beyond all. We touch him. We have a relationship with him. And then that is translated into the physical act of mitzvahs. As the verse continues, tefillin and mezuzah, and of course every mitzvah, likewise. There's so much more here, but that's a thought at least that will make this Shabbos a very, very special Shabbos. Any questions, any comments? I'm unmuting everybody. It'd be nice to see everybody if we could. And if we can't, we can't. But if we could, we could. All right. Wishing everybody. Oh, one second. Let me see just online over here. Rena, Rodriguez, Sina, Alan. Okay, Paula.
Great.
Heather. All right, folks. Sharing is caring, so please share this with others. Wishing everybody a wonderful, good Shabbos. Thank you for joining, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great class.
Thank you.
Shabbat
Good
shalom.
Shabbos.
Shabbos,
Good
good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Be well.